Pope Leo XIV and the shocking allegations, a crisis of credibility at the dawn of a papacy. Less than 3 weeks into his papacy, the newly elected Pope Leo XIV, the first American pope in history, faces a serious test of leadership. Allegations have emerged concerning his handling of sexual abuse cases during his time as head of the Augustinian Order in the United States. SNAP, the survivors network of those abused by priests, claims that the Pope either covered up or turned a blind eye to multiple incidents, including serious accusations involving priests such as John M. Ray and Richard Margress. These individuals allegedly continued to live in religious residences or hold positions despite being accused of misconduct involving minors. According to SNAP, this is not merely a case of personal failure, but a reflection of a broader systemic breakdown, a culture of secrecy and indifference that has plagued the Church for too long. The Vatican and the Augustinians have denied the majority of the allegations, asserting that Pope Leo XIV had actively established internal procedures to protect children as early as the 2000s. At the same time, Pope Leo XIV is striving to play a mediating role in the pursuit of peace in Ukraine, presenting an inspiring image of leadership on the international stage. Yet, the past allegations raise serious concerns about transparency and accountability within the Church's highest office. Will the new pope confront the past and pursue sweeping reform, or will the shadow of his earlier decisions darken the moral authority of his pontificate? The answer could shape the ethical future of the global Catholic Church. Leo XIV's past in Chicago, unanswered questions. Before becoming the first American pope, Leo XIV, born Robert Prevost, had a long and committed journey within the Church in his homeland, particularly in Chicago, where he held several leadership roles within the Augustinian Order. It is this period that has come under intense scrutiny following his election to the papacy, as allegations continue to surface about how he handled sexual abuse cases within the Church. SNAP has openly criticized Prevost for what they perceive as enabling behavior toward accused priests, most notably John M. Ray, who was investigated for inappropriate behavior with minors but continued to reside in a religious guest house in Chicago under the Augustinians' supervision. Another case involves Dr. Richard Margress, who allegedly sent inappropriate messages to a teenage boy and was not removed from ministry until after the media reported on the incident. These examples, according to SNAP, reveal a pattern of failed leadership, where institutional reputation was prioritized over the safety of victims. Although Church officials maintain that Prevost implemented reforms starting in the early 2000s and helped establish child protection committees, many questions remain unanswered. His role as provincial superior in Chicago, a city tied to several abuse scandals, makes this chapter of his past particularly sensitive. Now that he leads the global Catholic Church, the public and survivors alike await a clearer, more decisive stance from the Vatican, which now faces unprecedented scrutiny. Named cases: the lingering shadows over Pope Leo XIV's past. The election of Cardinal Robert Prevost as Pope Leo XIV immediately reignited public attention on several controversial cases from his past, drawing strong reactions from organizations and individuals, especially survivors of clergy abuse. They have publicly named and highlighted specific incidents, calling into question his role and responsibility during his leadership of the Augustinians in the U.S., particularly in Chicago. Among the most discussed cases is that of Dr. John M. Ray, who was accused of inappropriate conduct with minors. Despite being investigated, Ray continued to reside at an Augustinian guest house in Chicago for years without serious disciplinary action. This sparked public concern over whether such leniency was an act of concealment. Another notable case involves Dr. Richard Margress, accused of sending inappropriate messages to a teenager. Rather than being immediately suspended, Margress continued in ministry until the matter became public through media coverage, only then facing suspension. These incidents were publicly condemned by SNAP, which criticized Prevost's slow and opaque response. They argue that this pattern reveals a style of management that prioritized the protection of the institution's image over the safety of children and the transparency owed to the faithful. Despite claims from the Vatican and Church officials that Prevost took reformist actions early in the 2000s, these named cases continue to provoke doubt and scrutiny. Now, as Pope, his actions and willingness to disclose past records are being watched closely by a global audience, demanding unprecedented levels of clarity and accountability. SNAP's view: pressure for transparency from past to present. SNAP, the survivors network of those abused by priests, responded quickly and forcefully to the election of Cardinal Robert Prevost as Pope Leo XIV. According to the organization, the new pope cannot evade responsibility for the events that occurred under his leadership, particularly when he served as the Augustinian provincial in the United States, a tenure during which several accused priests remained active in ministry. Although Prevost himself is not accused of committing abuse, SNAP holds him accountable for failing to adequately address allegations. They criticize him for allowing accused priests to remain within religious communities rather than immediately removing them, isolating them, or publicly disclosing the allegations to protect parishioners. One of SNAP's main demands is for Pope Leo XIV to release all records related to abuse cases and how they were handled during his time in leadership in Chicago. They argue that transparency is essential to restoring public trust in the Catholic Church, which has been deeply damaged by decades of cover-ups and mishandled cases. Additionally, SNAP is calling for concrete action from the new pope, reforming reporting procedures, ensuring independent investigations, and ending the culture of silence that protects institutional reputation at the expense of victims. They insist that if Leo XIV genuinely wishes to renew the Church, he must start by publicly and humbly acknowledging his own leadership responsibilities and past decisions. At this critical moment, Pope Leo XIV is not only a spiritual leader, but a symbol of hope for millions of believers, including those deeply wounded by past abuse. According to SNAP, his responsibility transcends his papal title. It requires bold, practical steps and the courage to face the truth. Responses from the Augustinians and the Vatican. Amid the wave of criticism regarding Pope Leo XIV's past as provincial of the Augustinian order in the U.S., both the Augustinians and the Vatican have issued official responses to clarify the issues raised. The Augustinian order has stated that during Robert Prevost's leadership, he followed all church guidelines for handling abuse allegations. They emphasized that all reported cases were investigated in accordance with proper procedures, and no evidence suggests that Prevost deliberately ignored or covered up any complaints. According to their spokesperson, several accused priests were closely monitored or removed from ministry once credible evidence surfaced. However, SNAP and several victims argue that such measures were insufficient. They point out that many cases remained confidential and that accused individuals continued to live and work within religious communities before any disciplinary action was taken. From the Vatican, a spokesperson expressed confidence in the integrity and dedication of Pope Leo XIV, adding that the Holy See is listening to victim advocacy groups and reaffirming its commitment to reforming child protection systems. While acknowledging the Church's wounds from past abuse scandals, the Vatican underlined the Pope's role in healing and renewal. Despite the apparent good faith in defending the new Pope's reputation, both institutions are treading carefully in how they address past controversies. The real question is no longer just what Leo XIV did or did not do in the past, but how he will act now to restore credibility and hope for the global Church. SNAP remains unconvinced by official responses. Despite official statements from the Vatican and the Augustinian order in defense of Pope Leo XIV, Robert Prevost, SNAP remains unsatisfied. In a public statement, the organization expressed disappointment and skepticism regarding the Church's transparency and actual accountability in handling past abuse cases. SNAP emphasized that the Vatican's response was defensive and failed to address the core allegations. They pointed out that multiple victims had previously reported their abuse to Prevost's office but received no adequate follow-up. The organization also questioned why certain accused priests remained in ministry for years after the allegations surfaced. To SNAP, the issue is not simply the number of cases handled, but the way church leaders, including Prevost, chose to respond, often in ways that minimized institutional damage rather than protected victims. One SNAP representative remarked, "Pope Leo XIV must answer not only for what he did, but also for what he failed to do, especially when survivors were most in need of protection and justice." SNAP is also demanding an independent investigation into cases that occurred during Prevost's tenure in Chicago, with full participation from non-church entities to ensure objectivity. Only through genuine transparency, they argue, can the church begin to rebuild its moral credibility. Their continued pressure underscores that the crisis of sexual abuse in the church remains an open wound, not easily healed, even as a new pope pledges reform. The test of faith and the church's future under Pope Leo XIV. The election of Cardinal Robert Prevost as Pope Leo XIV marks a historic moment for the Catholic Church, but also signals the beginning of profound challenges regarding credibility and the faith of the Church's global community. Though Leo XIV is known for his intellectual depth and leadership experience across diverse cultural settings, the resurfacing of past abuse-related controversies casts a long shadow over his papacy's opening chapter. The fact that groups like SNAP and survivors themselves are raising their voices so early in his pontificate has stirred unease both within and beyond the Church. In the midst of a decades-long crisis of trust, the emergence of such allegations right at the outset raises concerns about whether the Church can truly deliver on its promises of reform and transparency. Furthermore, the responses from the Vatican and the Augustinians, where Leo XIV once held significant authority, are perceived by many as vague and lacking in substance. This perception fuels doubts about the Church's readiness to fully confront its past and take clear responsibility. Many Catholics are now looking not for reassurances, but for concrete actions. The future of the Catholic Church now depends largely on how Pope Leo XIV addresses these criticisms. If he is serious about restoring trust, he must take firm steps, release sensitive records, support independent inquiries, and above all, prioritize the safety and dignity of survivors. Only then can the Church hope to regain the respect of millions of believers watching this new pontificate unfold, not only with hope, but with profound scrutiny. Pope Leo XIV's role in promoting global peace, beyond the controversies of the past, Pope Leo XIV is still regarded as a figure who could contribute meaningfully to global peace, a traditional but increasingly vital role for the leader of the Catholic Church. With a strong academic background and years of pastoral service in Latin America, where injustice and conflict have been common, Leo XIV is seen as deeply aware of the links between justice, reconciliation, and peace. In recent years, the world has witnessed rising political polarization, armed conflicts, and humanitarian crises. In this context, the Pope's moral authority and advocacy for peace have never been more essential. Leo XIV has consistently called for dialogue, nonviolence, and unity among nations, particularly in his speeches at international religious conferences and during his work in Peru and Chicago. He has also emphasized the role of religion in overcoming hatred and prejudice, and urged political leaders to act in the interest of humanity rather than narrow power interests. The Pope encourages Catholic communities worldwide to engage actively in peace-building efforts, support refugees, and fight against social injustice. To be truly effective, however, these efforts must be accompanied by concrete global initiatives. Visits to conflict zones such as the Middle East, Africa, or Ukraine, and meetings with leaders of other faiths could be key steps to establishing Leo XIV as a genuine peace builder in an increasingly divided world. The message of peace from Pope Leo XIV. From the very beginning of his papacy, Pope Leo XIV has delivered a powerful message of peace, placing it at the heart of his mission. At a time when the world faces prolonged wars, refugee crises, ethnic tensions, and political polarization, the Pope's message is not just a moral appeal, but a call to action for the entire Catholic Church. He emphasizes that peace cannot be achieved by remaining silent in the face of evil or through superficial compromises. He calls for courage in dialogue, sincerity in reconciliation, and justice in rebuilding broken communities. For him, peace is not simply the absence of war, but the presence of justice, solidarity, and mercy. Through his homilies, audiences, and public addresses, Pope Leo XIV continues to stress the responsibility of every individual and community in the work of peace, from political leaders and international organizations to ordinary believers in daily life.